Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are on this planet, and welcome to our SETI Live. That was cool. This is our new intro. I really like it. I hope you like it too. My name is Franck Marchis. I'm a researcher at the SETI Institute, and today we are going to talk about something I've been reading about for quite a long time, called the hard steps. That's a very difficult word to use, and how this model has been necessary to explain the emergence of intelligent life. And we have someone to challenge this idea with us today. Hello, Dan. How are you?
Nice. Thanks for having me.
So Daniel Milis is a postdoc at the University of Munich, and he's a geobiologist. So can you tell quickly what is a geobiologist for a viewer?
Yeah, so geobiologists study not only the evolutionary history of life on the planet, but also the planet itself and how the planetary surface environment has changed over time. So how the climate has changed, how the composition of the air, the atmosphere has changed, and how these environmental changes are linked to biological changes.
Okay. So today, the work you're going to talk about is your research that suggests that intelligent life may not be some kind of anomaly, but rather an evolution, a natural evolution, predictable outcome of planetary evolution in general. So this is very interesting. And this paper was published 2 months ago in Science Advances, if I remember. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's right. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So before we dive into this science, you're a geobiologist. So you study Earth at scale of the species, basically the 4.5 billion years.
Mhm.
If I could give you the power of going back in time and talking to an organism, any, which one will you choose and what will you ask?
So I like this question a lot. Okay, so I would go back and I would want to have a conversation with something called a rangiomorph. Uh, so these are really interesting organisms. They appear in the fossil record around 570 million years ago, and they are the oldest complex, macroscopic, multicellular organisms to enter the fossil record. And they're really beautiful. They have this kind of fractal, self-similar branching pattern to their organization. And they're really enigmatic, but it looks like they're early animals, essentially, representing lineages that are no longer with us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they essentially mark this division between what previously was like an exclusively microbial biosphere. And then on the other side, leading up to the modern day, you get this macroscopic complexity that characterizes the modern Earth, like coral reefs and rainforests. These sorts of environments that we have today are really unusual from this deep time perspective. And these rangiomorphs, they kind of represent they're right at that boundary. So they're
Okay.
harbingers of things to come. And they're really enigmatic, and I want to know how they lived and how it feels to be kind of first on the scene in this kind of complex macroscopic phase space. So they're the pioneers of kind of modern life. And they
Okay.
lived at a really weird time in Earth history. So I would have a lot to ask them.
Good. Okay, so let's go into this paper specifically. So you introduced the concept of windows of habitability. Could you tell us a bit more about what those windows are and how Earth's history suggests that they were important for the emergence of complex life and intelligent life?
Sure. So Earth's surface environment has changed dramatically since like the origin of the Earth till today. And there are a lot of examples you could point to, but the most famous example, the example we talk about the most in geobiology is probably the oxygen content of the atmosphere. And there are three like main divisions in the geologic timescale, and they each correspond to kind of three different environmental regimes, and especially with respect to oxygen. So, like the first interval, Earth was anoxic; it was oxygen free. Then the atmosphere became oxygenated, and oxygen became like a stable feature of the atmosphere, but not at modern levels. there's a later transition to modern levels, closer to the modern day. So already we have like these three distinct windows with respect to oxygen. And if you look at the tree of life and you try to reconstruct major evolutionary innovations in the past, you realize these different organisms and these different origination events, they have different environmental requirements. So some of them didn't need oxygen at all, and they happened when the Earth had no oxygen. Others need a little bit of oxygen, and they happened when the Earth was in this intermediate oxygen state where oxygen was present, but not at modern levels. Then there's some organisms like ourselves that require modern levels of oxygen. So we naturally find ourselves during this window of Earth's habitability where oxygen is sufficiently high to support us. And so necessarily we find ourselves living now when oxygen is high and not, say, very early in Earth's history when oxygen was too low to support us. So that's the logic behind these windows of opportunity. And you can define these windows using oxygen, but also other parameters that characterize Earth's surface environment.
Like which one, for instance?
So things like temperature, like that's really controversial, reconstructing the long-term temperature history of life on Earth. But different organisms clearly have different temperature tolerances, and older organisms that originated earlier in Earth's history tend to have higher temperature tolerances. So if the early Earth was hot, like some people think, like much warmer than today, it would have been conducive to these ancient organisms, but not us. So the Earth would have had to cool in order for organisms like us to emerge. Other things are like primary productivity, the amount of photosynthesis that's happening on the planet, which controls how much food is available for ecosystems. This has changed dramatically over Earth's history. So these are other examples. The nutrient availability in the oceans, and the style of plate tectonics, and the availability of land above the ocean. These are all things that have changed over time and have impacted the diversity of organisms that the Earth is able to support.
All right. Thank you. So let me say hi to some of our viewers watching us from various places in Atlanta, in New York, in Netherlands, in Southeast Asia, in France. We are talking about, in Manchester, New Jersey. So not the Manchester, UK, Manchester, New Jersey. That's where you're from, right?
I'm from New Jersey, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And just a reminder, we're talking with Dan Mills about very interesting topic today, which is that asking whether or not intelligence life is something that it's easy and should have appear on Earth. Okay, so we in this paper you talk about the interdisciplinary approach. I see some of my colleagues. One of my colleagues is an astronomer, is co-author, for instance, Jason Wright. Why is it important to kind of put together scientists from different fields, astrophysics, geobiology, and why this collaboration is important to understand the evolution of life?
Right. So originally, this paper, we're responding to something called the hard steps model, which is a model of evolution that argues that it's really hard to evolve intelligent life on a planet like our own. And this whole idea came from a physicist, and this idea was widely used and cited by other physicists, astronomers, and a lot of people from the earth and life sciences weren't really involved. And on one level, it was really interesting to even hear the hard steps model, because it's a very different approach to looking at life on Earth. And it's an approach I never would have thought of, and I never heard a geologist or a biologist really talk about. So even being introduced to this different perspective, and then with my colleagues, my astronomer colleagues like Jason Wright and Adam Franck, who are looking at this hard steps problem, they're trying to understand its logic, but it's a model of evolution. So to really address it, you need to have some kind of background in biology and in geology, which they didn't have. So they brought in me and my colleague Jen McElhatty to kind of fill in those knowledge gaps. And then together we were able to work through this argument. So to even really assess an argument like this, like the hard step model, it does necessarily require that all these, different disciplines interact. And that's just with the theory. In my training, I was never taught how to operate a telescope or how to interpret data from a telescope. So when it comes to actually looking for, signs of life or intelligent life beyond Earth, just from a technical standpoint, that's something I'm not able to do, but I'd like to be involved at least theoretically. And that's where I would, have to depend on my colleagues in astronomy.
Okay. So you developed a new type of model. How does this really challenge this traditional hard steps theory?
So
What's the
yeah,
differences you have?
right. So the hard step model argues that in order to have beings like ourselves, I guess having this conversation using technology like this, certain things needed to happen in the evolution of life in the past, right? And some of those transitions or events in this model had a very low probability of happening in the available time, and that's the time that the Earth is able to support life. This is a finite window, right? And with respect to this window, some of these evolutionary transitions may have been really unlikely, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the universe is a big enough place. Earth could just be one of these lucky planets. All these steps happen to happen before the clock ran out, and here we are talking about it. But in our model, we're arguing that these weren't events with really low likelihoods, that they actually could have had relatively high likelihoods while the Earth is still habitable. And why they happened when they did and not earlier in Earth history can be explained by the opening of these different global environmental windows. Because I was the person who formulated the hard steps model, Brandon Carter. He wanted to know why humans appeared now in Earth's history and not billions of years ago. Why did it take so long for us to evolve? And our response is essentially the environment needed to change on geologic timescales, where his conclusion was that it's so unlikely. All these events that needed to happen for us to be here have such low likelihoods that if we are going to appear before the planet goes extinct, we're going to evolve close to that upper limit. So that was his interpretation, but our interpretation is we evolved when we did, because that's when the surface conditions necessary for our existence were established.
Okay, so in your paper, there is this first figure, the temporal distribution of our candidate art steps. I know we don't want to have to talk about specifically part of or show any figures, but I see there is some moments specifically where you have some abrupt changes in the evolution of our planet. So does that mean that those changes was necessary to get to the point where we have an intelligence, or those changes were basically the beginning of a window, and we could have become intelligent at this moment? How does this can you explain this a little bit in more detail?
Yeah, so originally, like when people think of hard steps, they think of biological transitions, like this type of organism evolved from these types of organisms. And we explore that. But right, there are also these major environmental changes. For example, the opening of these new global windows of habitability. For example, when the atmosphere first was able to sufficiently accumulate oxygen and have oxygen be a stable component of the air, that's something that would not have happened without the origin of photosynthetic bacteria that release oxygen as a waste product, right? And that's a candidate hard step. It's something that people think could be a hard step, the origin of this kind of photosynthesis. But it's also clear, not only did that need to happen for us to be here, because we need oxygen in the air to breathe as organisms that require it. But the oxygenation of the atmosphere completely transformed Earth's surface environment, and not only because it allowed things like us to evolve, but it reorganized essentially all the major elemental cycles and essentially created another planet. And that's a result of this evolutionary innovation. And something similar can be said for the origin of animal multicellularity, which is associated more closely in time to the second rise of oxygen. And the earliest animals were also very impactful in how they structure ecosystems and even the impact they have on the chemistry of the oceans and so on. And they were instrumental, the earliest animals, in setting the stage for essentially the modern Earth, the past 500 million years or so, which is another major environmental transition. So it's clear that these evolutionary innovations happening amongst organisms have these profound environmental consequences. And then those environmental consequences then shape the evolution of beings that evolve later on. So it's this kind of feedback or this dance
Okay.
between, yeah, both the
Nice.
organism and the environment.
All right. So we're gonna take a few questions from our viewers, but I have one here. So, if the evolution of intelligent life is indeed a natural outcome of planetary evolution that we've previously thought, what are the implications for SETI?
Right. Well, when Brandon Carter formulated the hard steps model, one of the conclusions that he made is that SETI is very unlikely to succeed because we represent such an exceptional case in the universe that, yeah, there could be intelligent life elsewhere, but so far away that we'll never make contact with it or ever learn of its existence. But in this alternative view, there's a higher chance of SETI being successful, but it mostly depends on how common Earth-like planets are. If planets like our own are relatively common, and these planets evolve similarly to how Earth has evolved, then yeah, then we would say those planets have a higher likelihood of evolving, let's just say beings that we're capable of communicating with. So
Okay.
it's good news for SETI compared to the hard steps model.
So that's a good news for SETI. And I
Mhm.
like that. I like it's increased the chance of discovering an intelligent species elsewhere. Let me say hi
Exactly.
to people joining us from Italy. Oh, my mouse. Uh, and Tallahassee, Florida, BC, British Columbia, Austin, Texas, England. And yeah, so we're talking about in how intelligent life could appear on our planet and whether or not it's something which is difficult or something which is a natural evolution. And Dan is basically telling us that no, it's a natural evolution. Life should be, in fact, intelligent life should be elsewhere, right? Did I
Yeah.
summarize it?
Yeah,
Yeah?
that's perfect. Perfect. Yeah.
All right. So, what about the future? What about new modeling? What does it tell us about the future of life on our planet?
So people who model the Earth system, they try to reconstruct the past, the past, but they also, right, are able to forecast the future. And it looks like the biosphere, all life on Earth is going to go extinct in, let's say, another billion years or so, or maybe, 1.5 billion years or so. And so the future of life on Earth is much shorter than its past. We've evolved kind of close to the inevitable extinction of the biosphere, and it looks like or all life on Earth is going to go extinct either in two ways. It's going to be too hot; the oceans will vaporize, or something called CO2 starvation. CO2 on geologic timescales is actually going down
Mhm.
compared to what it was on the earlier. That trend's going to continue, and they think it might reach a point where CO2 is so low that plants can't use it to build their bodies, and essentially all autotrophy, self-making organisms like this will go extinct, and that'll be the collapse of ecosystems all over the world. Um, those are the two ways. So we have a billion and a half years left, and but it looks like animals and complex life, like animals, plants, have been around. Let's just say 500 million years. But if we have another billion years of this kind of evolution, I think a lot of interesting things can happen. Because one of the implications of the hard steps model is that, like, if we were going to go extinct, humans, nothing like us would evolve in the future before the planet goes extinct. It's remarkable enough that we evolved. But in this alternative, even if we were to go extinct, I hope we don't, but even if we do, it could be that there's a higher chance that some other animal lineage could do what we're doing. And it doesn't even have to be a primate. Like primates are only, I don't know, 60, 70 million years old. But if we have another couple 100 million years of evolution, I mean, there'll be new groups of animals that, you know, we can't anticipate. So I think some of these could have the cognitive capacity to have conversations like this and to do what we're doing. So I hope we don't go extinct, but there's still enough time in Earth's future, I think, for animal life to complex life to have other opportunities of doing this. And I find it reassuring in case we do go extinct, there could be backups, but I really don't think we'll go extinct, and I hope we don't.
Okay. All right. So we have questions. We have a question from Nuno Pereira. Do you think the mass extinctions are necessary for the emergence of intelligent life elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So like mass extinctions, as we generally think about it, it's more or less like a recent phenomenon. Recent, I mean, it's constrained to like the past 500 million years or so, because once animals and plants really got diverse, we get these mass extinction events where their diversity plummets. And I think they do play a really big role in kind of resetting everything and giving new opportunities for the lineages that persevere through these extinctions. It'd be really interesting to imagine, like obviously the last mass extinction did not happen, the one that killed off all the non-bird-like dinosaurs, the non-avian dinosaurs, we would not be here. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah.
But people have speculated then if birds or the non-bird dinosaur lineages that survived, that they would have been able to achieve a comparable level of cognition and maybe even achieve a technological civilization or something analogous to it. So yeah, if the last mass extinction didn't happen, maybe we wouldn't be here, but then maybe someone else would be. So it clearly plays a role. But I think there's a lot to think about there.
All right. We have a question from Sean James Daking. Do you believe that it's possible that our planet has had numerous resets brought by meteorites of multiple origin? I'll let you read the rest.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So one of the so the origin of life itself is considered like a hard step, and it's thought that it only happened once because all organisms that are alive today are descended from a single origin of life event. But it does raise this possibility that maybe life did originate before the origination event that gave rise to us, but then there was some kind of sterilizing impact early on in the Earth's history that led to the extinction of that life. And then once habitable conditions resumed, then life was able to originate, the event that led to us. So it could be that life originated multiple times when faced with these sterilizing impact events. Or maybe life really did originate once, and the presence of life itself prevented subsequent origins of life. We don't really know. But I think impacts early on in Earth's history could have played a role.
Good. So I'm noticing two things when I talk to a geobiologist, when they have the tendency to say recently.
Yeah.
When they talk about recently is like less than 1 billion years. So for people,
that's recent.
That's
just
remember
happened.
It's 4.5 billion years is the age of our planet, to give you an idea. So
right.
It's I love that. I love that for you. Recently is less than 1 billion.
Yeah. No, that's true.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you are giving kind of a positive hope for the SETI research with you with this new modeling. So it's kind of it's great that the hard step is something that I hear a lot when I give a conference, when I talk about SETI. A lot of people come telling me, well, intelligence is the result of so many anomalies happening at the same time on our planet, and intelligence may be rare because of that. So We'll see.
That's right.
It's a modeling, of course. We models can be challenged and
Of
evolve and
course.
get better over time. And in fact, that's my last question for you.
Hmm.
So what's your next step? You are University of Munich right now. Are you gonna still work on these windows of habitability, this modeling? Are you doing something different, working on astronomy? Are you what's the next big project for you?
So I will. I'm going to start another postdoctoral position at the University of Dusseldorf with Professor Bill Martin, who studies the origin of life, which is something I never formally studied before, but now I will. It'll be my job to investigate the origin of life, which is exciting. But in the broader picture, and I think this will take many years to accomplish, is what I'd like to do with following up with this hard steps model or our alternative to it is to define these global windows of habitability that we talked about earlier. And for example, with the origin of life, that would be, trying to estimate as best as we can the required environmental requirements or conditions that needed to accompany this transition from non-life to life. But I want to do the same thing with, photosynthesizing bacteria that release oxygen, eukaryotes like ourselves, animals, and try to figure out their environmental requirements. And then this will involve work with geologists, Earth system modelers to figure out when those conditions became established on Earth, to try to pinpoint these windows. And then in the search for like signs of life in the atmospheres of other planets, we can see how they kind of match or correspond to our windows of habitability. So we can estimate, okay, the planet has this kind of atmosphere and it looks like it's capable of supporting life. What kind of life could it support? Which windows are open and which ones are still closed.
Mm-hmm.
So then that would be the main implication or the main application that I would hope to see in the future with exoplanet data.
Nice. Yeah. So you are going to be using data observation taken by large telescopes in the future, which characterize those exoplanets and analyze the atmosphere or the surface temperature and so on, and see if those planets are going through the same windows of habitability. So you're giving a sense to a reason for these gigantic telescopes to be built, designed, launched, and operated. So that's great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's a
Thank you.
very nice conversation. I hope you like this conversation, people. It was great to have you, Dan. Thank you again.
Yeah,
Good
thanks for
luck with the
inviting me.
rest.
Yeah,
We
thank
uh,
you.
we are going to have you again. I have the feeling we're gonna have you in the future again. Keep us
I
posted
hope
about your
so.
research.
I will.
All
Thank you
right.
so much.
Okay, that was a SETI Live by the SETI Institute. Thank you for watching. We are a nonprofit organization, as you probably know. You can see our website at SETI.org. I'm going to ask you to help us to spread the love for science, search for life by sharing this video, putting a thumb up, writing a comments, questions, anything at the bottom, wherever you are watching us, on whichever platform you are watching us. That helps having this video seen by other people and building a bigger family of SETI researcher and SETI fans. That's important for all of us. And if you want to, if you feel you can make a small donation, you visit the SETI.org website. There is a button, something called donate or give now. I think that's give now. And you can make a small donation so Dan can go to Düsseldorf to operate his next to run his next model on this supercomputer, whatever he's using to do that, or any of our city researcher. Thank you again, Dan, and
Yeah.
we see you soon. Bye, everybody. Take care.